What's your favorite ride?
Valraven.
Valraven?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite ride?
Boy.
Millennium Force. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, mine too. That's why I got my shirt.
That's your favorite?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite ride?
I don't like mini rides anymore. I like the shows.
Well, I don't think Mr. Kinzel needs much of an introduction, to this group. But we are really excited to host Dick today to talk about his time as president and CEO of Cedar Fair and how he basically transformed Cedar Point and Cedar Fair from a kind of minor blip on the map to one of the major international amusement parks in the world. All of that, I was going through my head, and I grew up in the late 70s and 80s, and in Ohio, and we were far enough away that Cedar Point was an annual trip, a once a year thing. But growing up in those times, at the time when Dick was CEO, and watching all those great rides open up, and looking forward, almost every year, every other year to a good ride. And when the Magnum opened up, I was in heaven. I mean, that's still my favorite ride, hands down. That's a great ride. So Dick's here to talk about those days and his success as CEO of Cedar Fair. So with that, Dick, thank you.
Thank you, Dick. I really appreciate the invitation to tell you a little bit about my management style. Basically, how I began my career at Cedar Point as a supervisor in the food service division, and then after 15 years was promoted to president, CEO, and then later as chairman of the board. I want you to know, first of all, that I'm not here to lecture today on how to succeed. Rather than share a few stories with you on how I worked my way up the ladder at Cedar Point, and hopefully someday for you students here, it will help you as you climb the corporate ladder. What makes the story a little bit different, and in today's world even a little more difficult, is that I do not have an MBA or even a college degree. I attended La Crosse State Teachers College for 1 year, dropped out, and entered the workforce. When I got married in 1961, I was making $1.35 an hour. I married my childhood sweetheart. We got married, she was 18 and I was 20, and we've been married for 55 years.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the fact that what I've accomplished over the years. However, I never recommend it to anyone on the education part. I encourage you to stay in school and get as much education as you possibly can. One of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that my 4 children all have their degrees and are now successful individuals in their own rights. Needless to say, moving up the corporate ladder without a degree requires some luck, being in the right place at the right time, and having good common sense. I'd like to share with you today how I got to be considered to be the vice president and general manager of Valley Fair. That was Cedar Point's first acquisition in 1978. And then the decisions I made in that first year as general manager that led me to be president and CEO of Cedar Fair. And then how Cedar Fair grew from a 2-part company to a $1 billion New York Stock Exchange company. And finally, I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. Some of the decisions I made over that first year as Vice President and General Manager of Valley Fair will surprise you. They certainly are not conventional. I'm not sure over the next 30 minutes you will be thinking to yourself that maybe this guy doesn't have a full set of clubs, or maybe his elevator doesn't go all the way to the top. But right or wrong, this style worked for me, and it worked basically for several reasons. It worked because I loved my job, I loved my company, and I used good common sense, and I had the total support of my family. All of my decisions were made on the question, what would I do if I owned the company? As I mentioned, I started at Cedar Point in 1972 as a supervisor in the food service division. My first break came in 1975 when there was an opening for the director of operations position. I did not get the invitation to apply for that position. How could somebody in food service know anything about rides, park services, or entertainment? I asked for the opportunity to apply for that job. In fact, I begged for it. Common sense told me advancement at Cedar Point was through operations. Working with the public, involved in guest satisfaction was the quickest way to advance within the company. I was interviewed by Mr. Roos, who bought the park in 1957, and by the president and chief executive officer, Bob Munger. I wanted that position so bad, I studied rides, park services, and the company's history. In the end, I honestly believe I got the job by answering a basic question asked by Mr. Munger. And that was, what are the basic responsibilities, the main responsibilities of the Director of Operations at Cedar Point? My answer was short and to the point. The Director of Operations at Cedar Point is responsible for the guests from the time they enter the park until the time they leave the park. That was my first opportunity to interact with Mr. Roos and Mr. Munger. I worked very closely with Mr. Munger until his death in 1987. Growing up, I'm sure you've had your parents say, or you've told your parents, that you only have one time to make a good first impression. And that certainly was true in my case. After going into operations, I studied and learned my craft. Then in 1978, Cedar Point announced it acquired a small park in Minnesota, Valley Fair. Speculation began on who was going to go run that park. I never dreamed it would be me. In fact, I was hoping my boss would go there so I could apply for his job.
Yeah. Do tell.
Labor Day week in 1978, I got a call to come to Mr. Munger's office. He explained the position and asked if I would be interested in going to Minnesota as Vice President and General Manager of Minnesota. My answer was quick and short. When do you want me to leave?
Yeah.
I never negotiated the salary, asked about fringe benefits, or even a moving policy. I just wanted the opportunity to prove myself. Money has never been a driving force in my decision making. I love the challenge and the responsibilities that go with it. I wish I could tell you I was sent to Minnesota because of the great job I did in operations, but in truth, 2 Cedar Point vice presidents turned down that opportunity. I was the third choice. I was at the right place at the right time, and I was lucky. The next Wednesday, I walked into Valley Fair. Upon arriving, I found out that not only why I was the boss and the general manager at Valley Fair, but I was the 3rd highest paid employee of the park. The chief financial officer and the vice president of maintenance both made more money than me. I never called human resources or Bob Munger to question their decision on my salary. I never mentioned it to anyone. Why? Because I knew if the park was successful, Bob Munger would be successful, and ultimately I would be rewarded. I was just so thankful for the opportunity to prove myself. Shortly after arriving, we were interviewing for a marketing agency for the park. I got called out of the meeting to speak to a vice president at Cedar Point. He informed me I was now reporting to him, directly to him, not to the CEO, Mr. Munger. There was a long pause. My heart sunk. My response, that's just not going to happen. I hung up the phone and immediately called Mr. Munger. It's important to note here, I never raised my voice, never threatened to quit. I never put him in a position where he had to say something I did not want to hear. I explained to him that I didn't take this position to make someone else look good. I took the position for the opportunity to work directly for him. If the park was successful, I wanted the credit. If it failed, I was willing to accept the consequences. He knew in my voice I was not only hurt, but very sincere. Bob quickly explained that there was a misunderstanding and that I would continue to report to him. Experience had taught me that this was a true play for power by someone at Cedar Point. I could not let it happen. However, it really did shake up my faith in the company. When I came home to Sandusky that weekend, my wife Judy met me at the airport. She knew the hours I was working, the stress of trying to convert an entire company over a new set of policies and procedures. We talked the entire weekend. The decision was made that if I were going to report to anyone except the CEO, I would start looking for another position. I think it's important to note here again, I never raised my voice, I never threatened to quit. And for you young people here, remember, it's a lot easier to get a job when you have a job than it is to get a job when you don't have a job. Needless to say, I was in pins and needles for a long time after that. But the question has to be asked, Why would I not question my compensation package? And how could I not question being the boss and being paid less than the people reporting to me? Yet I am willing to risk it all, my entire career, for a title or who I report to. The answer is easy: ego. My efforts were not going to be rewarded by someone else. I was willing to risk everything. I had enough confidence in myself, and I knew Judy would support me to make the park successful. If I had to leave, I felt I could find another position. Having the support of your spouse and your family is very important on the road to success. Looking back today, I have to wonder if this decision didn't tell Mr. Munger I had a spine and was willing to fight for my turf. Take a quick drink here. This is not vodka.
Oh. It's not sherry.
That's rum.
Could be gin, that's cool.
As I said, money has never been a driving force in my decision making. Being successful is the ultimate reward. I hope the take here is this. Don't complain or challenge every decision your boss gives you, but fight for what you believe in. After giving it your best shot, know when to back off. Pick your battles carefully. You want to win the war. You don't care about the battles. And just remember this for you young people. Your boss may not always be right, but he'll always be the boss. And again, I repeat, don't ever put your boss, him or her, in a position to say something you don't want to hear. In May, the park opened. I spent most of the winter asking questions. I knew I was strong in operations, but I also knew, not having a formal education, I was weak in finance and marketing. On the 4th of July weekend, Bob Munger calls and says he wants me and Judy to come the next day to his home in Pepper Pike. I had no idea what he wanted. Judy's side of the story is she was there to bring home the body. When we arrived, I was called into Mr. Munger's office. Judy and Sheila, that would be Bob Munger's wife, went shopping. Bob asked me if I had seen the letter that the chief financial officer had written to him, questioning my management abilities, and stating that I did not have the ability to manage the park. I told him I had not seen the letter. He handed it to me and asked that I read it. When finished, his only comment was, "You know what you have to do." My mind raced for the right answer. Should I give the politically correct answer of, I'll call him into the office, find out the problem, and see if we can work together for the good of the company, and then go have a beer and sing Kumbaya all day? Or do I say what I really feel? My answer, I have to fire him. It was not only the right answer, it was the correct answer. I had a cancer in my office. I had to get rid of it if the park were to be successful. A couple of things I'd hope you take away from this story is, first, sometimes you have to do difficult things. Letting your chief financial officer go 2 months into the season, making everyone's job more difficult. There are times you have to make difficult decisions. Make them and get on with your life. Secondly, from the chief financial officer's position is, if you aim at the emperor, don't miss. A few weeks later, while talking to Mr. Munger, he tells me he understands all the startup problems I was having, and he appreciated my hard work. He also says he is increasing my salary. Up until this time, my job had been nothing but uphill. One problem, one crisis after another. I was the only one transferred to the new park. I had no support team who understood Cedar Park's policies, and I knew what I was trying to accomplish. I was really the Lone Ranger with no Tonto. This is where some of you are going to think, I don't know if this guy's really, how he got as far as he did. But I declined that raise, telling Bob I was hired to make the park successful. If every time there is a problem or a problem solved, you feel I have to be compensated, that is not the reason I am here. Bob's only response was fine and hung up. Bob was a man of few words. I honestly believe by turning down that raise, it changed the course of my career. Bob knew he had a faithful lieutenant who he could depend on no matter how bad things got. From that point on, I believe he had total faith, trust, and confidence in me. My job was a whole lot easier after that conversation. In December of that year, at normal compensation review, I was very nicely rewarded with an increase in salary and bonus. From that point on, I was no longer the number 3 compensated person at Valley Fair. And I never had to mention a word about it to anyone. But more importantly to me, shortly after the first quarter of 1980, I was promoted to Vice President of Cedar Point, along with being Vice President and General Manager of Valley Fair. I believe it was Bob's way of telling me there was no need to worry about who I was going to be reporting to going forward. The takeaway in the story is be patient, look for your opportunities and take it. Stand for what you believe in. Think long term, not short term. If you're good, you still may need some luck. For me, I found out over the years that the more time I spent in the park, the luckier I got. In my 8 years at Valley Fair, the most unusual ride or attraction we installed was in 1983. While I was at Cedar Point, we visited the Canadian National Exposition in Toronto and saw this crazy thing called a water slide that people paid extra money to ride. When I returned to Cedar Point, I presented that ride to my boss, but it never got out of committee. Needing something different in 1983 at Valley Fair, I made a proposal to the board of directors to install this attraction at Valley Fair, called it Liquid Lightning, and charged $2 for 20 minutes. Talk about being lucky. That summer, there were 24 days that exceeded 90-degree weather in the Minneapolis area. It was a huge success. Not even I accepted that kind of acceptance. It may have been the first water attraction put into any hard ride amusement park. These management experiences I shared with you today all took over a 10-month period of time. It would have been easy to quit, but I gave it time and used prayer and common sense to make my decisions. I honestly believe these decisions laid the foundation for me to be the president and chief executive officer of Cedar Fair when Bob Munger retired and the company went public in 1987. And it didn't hurt that Valley Fair grew from grossing $8 million annually to netting $8 million annually over that period of time. And attendance grew from 800,000 to 1 million people. In 1986, Mr. Munger retired as president and CEO and assumed the responsibilities of chairman of the board. I was promoted to the president and chief executive officer. At that time, the company consisted of 2 parks, Cedar Point and Valley Fair, 1 hotel, the Breakers, and the Cedar Point Marina. In 1987, Cedar Point Limited Partnership was formed, a New York Stock Exchange company, trading at $10 per unit with a $1 distribution. The company grew by acquiring existing parks, by improving and adding additional entertainment venues at Cedar Point and Valley Fair. At Cedar Point, additional venues included Soak City, Breakers Express, Marina Golf, go-kart tracks, a second marina, Castaway Bay Indoor Water Park, and Lighthouse Point. At Valley Fair, we added a water park and miniature golf courses. Our external plan was very simple. Stay within our industry, the business we knew so well. Look for underperforming properties at a fair price. Then clean the properties up, instituting the highest standards of safety, cleanliness, and service, and introduce a major ride or coaster as soon as possible. That business model has proven to be very successful. During my 25 years as CEO, we acquired 9 amusement parks, bought or built several water parks, and built 4 hotels. Returning to Cedar Point was altogether different than going to Valley Fair. Valley Fair was a new property opened in 1976. A management team had very little experience and very little sense of pride in their park. All of their policies and procedures had to be written and implemented. At Cedar Point, I inherited the strongest management team in the industry. Don Myers, Lee Jewett, Joe Vonderweiss, Dan Keller, Bill Neer, John Hildebrandt. My job was to stimulate ideas, grow the business, and let them run the parks. My last season as Director of Operations at Cedar Point before transferring to Valley Fair was 1978, the year the Gemini Twin roller coaster was introduced. That would have been the highest coaster in the world at 125 feet. That record set both attendance and revenue records for the park. For some reason, from that time until 1987, with the exception of the Iron Dragon, which was really a kiddie coaster, no major ride was introduced at the park. The decision to put in the Magnum XL 200 in 1989 was really a pretty easy decision. The highest coaster in the world at that time was the Bandit, located in Japan at about 180 feet. In my presentation to the board of directors, I requested the construction of a steel coaster at 185 feet, which would have made it the highest coaster in the world. One of our board members asked the cost of going 200 feet. That was it. The Magnum XL 200 was built for $7 million. 200 feet tall, there was nothing like it in the world. A 200-foot drop, almost a mile of track, 72 miles an hour, multiple speed bumps, and 3 tunnels, all in 2 minutes. That was the most profitable 15-foot of coaster track in the world.
Yeah.
That $7 million investment for the Magnum returned $10 million to the bottom line the first season. It started the coaster wars. The business plan was in place. A major coaster arrived at Cedar Point every other year, if possible, setting a world record of some kind. The odd years, money would be directed toward the resort side of the business, modernizing existing hotel breakers, the campsite, and the marina. After the Magnum came the disaster transport, then the Mean Streak. At that time, it was the highest wooden coaster in the world, the Raptor, which still holds a single season attendance record at 3.6 million people. That was built in 1984. The Manus in 1996, and then what I believe is the best coaster ever built, the Millennium Force in 2000. The tallest and fastest complete circuit coaster in the world, at speeds of 93 miles an hour and 310 feet tall. Wicked Twister was built in 2002, and then Top Thrill Dragster in 2003. That was the world's first 400-foot coaster, doing 120 miles an hour. Cedar Point is the only park in the world today that has a 200-foot, a 300-foot, and a 400-foot coaster. And then finally, Maverick was built in 2007. We knew Cedar Point was the mother lode. Cedar Point had to be successful if the company were to survive. Some of that pressure was lessened when Knott's Berry Farm was purchased in 1997 for $245 million. A year-round park located in Southern California that also did over 3 million in attendance annually. Knott's had the first Halloween events of any park in the world, and that idea was quickly taken to the other parks and have proven highly successful. Before the purchase of Knott's, Cedar Point was only open 2 or 3 weekends after Labor Day. Today, the park is open through October, all because of the haunt at Knott's Berry Farm. Just a little bit of our 2 most controversial acquisitions, and then I'll take any questions you might have. In 2004, we purchased Six Flags Wildwater Kingdom in Aurora, Ohio for $145 million and renamed it back to its original name, Jaga Lake. We eliminated the animal side of the park, which you knew at SeaWorld, and we just ran the hard ride part of the park. A lot of people thought we purchased that property to close it, but that just is not true. We invested millions of dollars into the park and built a separate water park. Unfortunately, the amusement park closed in 2007, and the water park closed this year. While every effort was made to make the park successful, we, like everyone else, could not compete with Cedar Point. Why did we buy it in the first place? The question has to be asked, so why did we buy it in the first place? We could not take the chance of a major competitor coming into our most profitable market, Cedar Point, and opening another park to compete with us. The best acquisition we made was the purchase of the 5 Paramount parks in 2006 for $1.24 billion. Before the acquisition, with the exception of Knott's Berry Farm, all of our properties were in the northern United States, with Cedar Point contributing the majority of income and profit. After the acquisition, we had geographical diversity with 4 out of our 5 new properties in the south. We knew Kings Island in Cincinnati was a great park. In fact, we had looked at that park before it was sold to Paramount. We weren't sure about the potential at Kings Dominion in Richmond, Virginia, or Great America in Santa Clara, California. But we felt Carowinds in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Canada's Wonderland in Toronto were underperforming parks and had tremendous potential. Paramount Parks had focused on the family markets and the movie themes. Our plan was to attract the teen market with the introduction of major thrill rides, mainly large coasters at each park. Not only did this give us geographical diversity, but it also gave us financial diversity, as no one park contributed more than 22% of the revenues. Purchasing the Paramount Parks was the best decision I made in my 25 years as CEO. It put Cedar Point where it is today, one of the most profitable entertainment companies in the world. In 2004, the Golden Ticket Awards were first presented. They are our industry's Oscars, the best of everything. The winners are determined by voting from worldwide coaster clubs and amusement park enthusiasts from around the world. In the awards 13 years, Millennium Force has been voted the best steel coaster in the world 11 times, and Cedar Point has been voted the best park in the world 11 out of 13 years. This past September, Cedar Point was again voted the number 2 for only the second time park in the world, beaten out by a park in Germany. And the Millennium Force was voted the number 2 coaster in the world, beaten out only by the new Cedar Fair coaster introduced at Carowinds. Maverick was voted number 12. The Magnum XL 200, even though it was built in 1989, was voted number 15. And the Top Thrill Dragster was number 19. Of the top 25 steel coasters in the world, Cedar Point, or Cedar Fair Parks, had 11, and 4 of the top 20 coasters in the world. In 2005, Cedar Fair had revenues of $1.24 billion, operating income of $232 million, with assets of over $200 billion, of employing approximately 1,700 full-time employees and approximately 41,000 seasonal employees, entertaining over 24 million guests annually. Cedar Fair was a great company to work for, and I'm very proud to be part of its history. I hope you have learned something from my experiences that you may carry on to your business career. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be now glad to answer any questions you might have. This is the easy part. Yes?
A few years ago, there was a rumor that Cedar Fair, when you were stepping down, Cedar Fair headquarters would move from Sandusky, but they decided not to.
Sure.
Do you think you had some influence on why Cedar Fair stayed here?
Not really. This is the natural place for it to be. It's always been our headquarters.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. She asked that there were rumors after I left that Cedar Point headquarters were going to be moved to someplace else. And my answer is basically I don't really see that happening because Sandusky has always been our headquarters. It's been what we've been associated with. Cedar Point, is our most profitable park in the system. Most of our management team has been here. In fact, when we bought the Paramount Parks, they had a whole building in Charlotte, and we closed that building up and brought that management team to Sandusky. So I think Matt, the new CEO of Cedar Point, he will keep this to be I think Cedar Point will always be the corporate headquarters or Sandusky will always be the corporate headquarters for Cedar Point. At least I hope it will be.
Mm-hmm. We do too.
Anything else? Yes.
Did you buy all the Six Flags parks or just one?
We just bought one. Over the years, we looked at several of the Six Flags properties, but in the end, we knew Six Flags was having financial difficulties. In fact, they went bankrupt in 2008. And I happened to be at a convention with Karen Burke, the CEO of Six Flags, and I asked him if he'd be interested in selling Jogga Lake. And we worked out a deal, and the reason is if they were going to split that company up, which there was talk to do, we didn't want to take a chance of someone like, I don't think it would be Disney, but Universal Studios or some other company to come into that acres that they have there and develop a property and compete with us. Because quite frankly, when it was Jogga Lake ran by Gasper Lococo and SeaWorld, that property those properties combined did over $3 million in attendance. They were both very successful. But then Six Flags combined both of them, and they just couldn't make it work. And then we had no interest in going into the animal business. I mean, we knew when we bought it that the animals, because at that time PETA was getting very active, and people's attitudes towards animals and being in captivities was changing really quick, and we wanted no part of that park. Yes.
How long was Cedar Point open?
Cedar Point opened in 1870. It's the second oldest amusement park in the world. In Conneaut Lake, or not Conneaut Lake,
Lake Compounds.
Lake Compounds is the oldest part, but they're really not the oldest part because they only open for a couple of days each summer just to say they were the oldest park. We actually looked at buying that park. And, but that, Cedar Point is the second oldest park in the world.
Okay.
Yes? Yes?
As CEO, did you ever have any perks like endless rides on a roller
I did. I was on, I see, when I was at Cedar Point and when I was at the Valley Fair, starting with the corkscrew in 1976, I was in the first seat of the first train of every major coaster that went on at those two parks when I was there. Those days were a little bit different. Today they run a ride for, as Ann could tell you, they run a ride for months before they let anybody on it. A funny story on the Magnum XL 200, it was the Saturday before the park opened. And Ron Toomer from Arrow was there and our mechanics were there. And they sent the ride around for the first time. And it came back into the station and somebody yelled, "Let's go," and we jumped in the front seat. And, but unfortunately, the trim brakes coming into the station were not working. We came really hot into that station. It scared a lot of people.
Where was your wife that day?
including me.
Your wife
So
was-
after that, we ran a few test cars.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
I read an article about you when you were president of Cedar Point, that you would go in the morning and walk the midway and all the parks. Do you miss that?
Oh yeah, that's what I miss most. Yeah, I miss the people, miss getting out. Yeah, I love walking in the parks. I made it a habit of trying to go up to the front gate just about every. When I was at Valley Fair, I did go up to the gate every day because basically I was wondering why the people weren't coming. And but basically I would take tickets there, and then I spent a lot of time in the park. I tried to make a tour of the park every day when I was there. Yes.
Not really a question as much as a comment. I worked at Cedar Point from 2003 to 2009, so I was not one of the young ones. But I just want you to know, I had never worked so hard for so little money and never loved a job as much as I did.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things it was the family atmosphere, which we always, well, we meaning the people I worked with, always attributed it to you, because with you, it was your family.
No, thank you.
And one other comment, one time I was walking behind you, you were by yourself, I think you were headed to your office, there was a little piece of something on the ground, you're walking by, you pick it up, you throw it in the trash, and it was like, oh my gosh, the man practices what he teaches. So I just want to thank you for that wonderful time of my life.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you being an employee, and believe me, I loved every minute of it. It was a great job. Yes.